Life wisdom. Someone asked that we make a video about the political right and left. And because we do videos just based on your requests, this video is going to be about exactly that. If there's a topic that you would like us to cover in a future video, just leave it in a comment and we may make that video just for you. But before we get started discussing political parties and the left and the right, I want to get a feel for what party you associate yourself with. Do you consider yourself a Democrat, a Republican, a member of the Green Party, or maybe the Tea Party? Leave your comment and let me know. The left and the right. These terms originated during the French Revolution, where people who were in support of the king would sit on his right, and people who opposed the king would sit on his left. Over the years, these terms have stayed the same, but what each side means has actually evolved and changed. In modern times, we call this a political spectrum, and oftentimes there is a center added as well. But it's important to recognize that there isn't one standard political spectrum that everyone agrees on. Different people have different opinions about where certain political parties and political ideologies fall on this spectrum. And because people have different opinions, they will undoubtedly disagree and even argue about them. And no matter what I say in this video, there will probably be somebody who disagrees, because there just isn't a standard political spectrum that everyone follows. If you do a simple Google Images search for political spectrum, you'll notice how much these political spectrum vary from chart to chart. Some people put anarchy on the far left, while others put anarchy on the far right. Some people put Nazi National Socialism on the far right, while others put National Socialism on the far left. So you see that people can't even agree on which goes on each end of the spectrum. Also, different countries have different political parties. In the United States, for instance, we have socialists, Democrats, liberals, Republicans, conservatives, and a Tea Party. But in the European Union, there are communists, socialists, Green Party, Christian Democrats, conservatives, and right-wing extremists. But as a general rule, when someone talks about the political left, they're usually referring to communists, socialists, and Democrats. And when someone refers to the political right, they're referring to Republicans, conservatives, and libertarians. One of the primary problems with the political spectrum, and why there's often so much disagreement, is that people will try to dump the political parties or the political ideologies on an arbitrary spectrum without ever defining either end of the spectrum. Or they will define either end of the spectrum with an extreme political party rather than with an issue. You see, you could come up with a fairly accurate political spectrum if you based it on just one issue. For example, if we had individual freedom on the right, then on the left we would have complete government control. And if we had private property rights on the right, then we would have complete government ownership and community property on the left. Or we could define the right as a small government and limited governmental control, and on the left we would have big government. In terms of an economy, we could see that the right is a free enterprise, and on the left there is a planned economy. And if you placed the political parties on a spectrum based on any one of these issues, you could have a fairly accurate spectrum to go by. Of course, each spectrum would look a little bit different, because political parties have different stances on different issues. But if you did make a political spectrum based on just one issue, then it would give you an accurate look at where the political parties fall in terms of that one issue. To get into this a little more deeply, if we put political left and political right into Wikipedia, we get something like this. Left wing describes an outlook or specific position that accepts and supports social equality, often in opposition to social hierarchy or social inequality. And right wing describes an outlook or specific position that accepts and supports social hierarchy and social inequality. What I find interesting about this is that this spectrum is defined by Wikipedia in terms of Marxist theory. So it's kind of a free education in communist philosophy right there on Wikipedia. And these definitions are looking at the issues of social equality and social hierarchy. So let's dive into that as an issue. So we have social equality on the left and social inequality on the right. And it kind of sounds like a bad deal for the people on the right. I mean, doesn't social inequality sound like a bad thing? Why don't we take a closer look? One of the foundational principles in the Communist Manifesto is that social inequality is a bad thing and communism is the answer. And we could have social equality in terms of rights or any number of things, but in terms of communism, this is referring to the distribution of wealth. And social inequality would mean an uneven distribution of wealth where some people have more and some people have less. It boils down to the haves and the have-nots. And in Marxist theory, the uneven distribution of wealth causes conflicts between the classes. And the solution is for the government to scoop up all the wealth and then distribute it evenly or as needed. Recently in the United States, we saw the Occupy movement, which started with Occupy Wall Street. And some people in this movement claimed that 1% of the population controlled 99% of the wealth. And while still pretty astounding, the figure is closer to 1% of the population control about 40% of the wealth. But realize that the main thrust of this movement was to incite social strife by pointing out the social wealth inequality. In contrast, the political right is largely based on the founding fathers of the United States and on British philosopher John Locke's idea of natural rights. You know, the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property. That by natural law, we all have ownership of our work, and there will probably be some inequality between different people, because each person's wealth is based on his own personal production. It basically states that each person has ownership of that which they create and the freedom to exchange it and trade it as they please. And if we look in the real universe to see what's natural, we can see that inequality is pretty natural. Some people are taller than others, some are born into more wealth than others, some are more educated or less educated, or have more or less ambition than others. But the Constitution of the United States just guarantees that we all have equal rights, not that we all have equal wealth, equal abilities, or even equal opportunities. But people don't often talk about wealth inequality. Instead, you'll hear them use terms like social inequity or social injustice. And all of these different terms are really just ways of discussing the wealth inequality. You hear about the gap between the rich and the poor. And basically, all of these terms are implying that it's somehow unfair or even an injustice for one person to earn or own more than another. But should someone who doesn't work receive the same amount of money as someone who works 50 hours a week? Should someone who works in a drive-through window make the same amount of money as someone who went to college and maybe even grad school for another 10 years? Is the value of the work done by a good doctor more or less valuable to the community than the work done by someone working in a drive-through window? So on the right, we have the idea that if someone works hard, they're entitled to the benefits of their own labor. And on the left, we have communism, which advocates the total disintegration of private property rights so that no person actually personally owns anything, and all of the property is community-owned or owned by the government. Karl Marx claimed that socialism was a necessary step between capitalism and communism. So socialism isn't really an end in itself, it's just a means to the end, which is a full communist society. And the basic idea in socialism is a redistribution of wealth, so taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor, just like Robin Hood. Essentially, the government takes money from the rich or from the taxpayers and redistributes it through social services provided to the poor. So Marx had several criteria for a communist society, and one of them was a graduated income tax, meaning that the more you made, the more taxes you would pay. To give you an example, here in the United States, 70% of the taxes are paid by only the top 10% of the population, and the lower 40% income-wise don't pay any taxes at all. It's an interesting thing to note that our founding fathers were staunchly opposed to a graduated income tax, and the graduated income tax we now have in the United States is only in existence because of an amendment to the Constitution. So on the right, we have natural rights, private property, and a capitalist free market economy. And on the left, we have social rights, those which are sanctioned and dictated by the government, community property, and government-planned economy, where the government controls the production and distribution of goods. And another thing I want to point out is that Republicans in the United States have been systematically pushed more and more over to the left through a process called privatization. So basically how this works is the government takes our tax dollars and instead of performing the social services itself, it actually takes those tax dollars and pays them to a privately owned for-profit company that's then responsible for providing those social services. Some examples of privatized social services include the prison system, toll roads, the foster care system, and even privately owned hospitals and dental offices that accept Medicaid or Medicare. These are all privately owned, for-profit businesses that provide social services and bill the government, i.e., the taxpayer. And we know that we can count on a privately owned business to prioritize its own profit. And these companies are more than happy to provide social services when it's the government, i.e. the taxpayer, footing the bill. Often these are called public-private partnerships. And while that sounds all well and good, it's just allowing these for-profit companies to make their profit off of the taxpayer. It's the ultimate synthesis of capitalism and socialism. You could think of it as for-profit socialism. So now that the free enterprise, privately owned companies can actually make a profit by providing social services, it's somewhat pushed the private sector and even the Republican Party farther and farther left. So this was a basic video on the political right and the political left, and in a future video we're going to take a closer look at communism and socialism. Could communism actually work? If so, or if not, why? And in another video, we're going to take a closer look at global warming and climate change. Are we really all doomed to a fiery death? Or can we all chill out a little bit? Be sure to subscribe for that future video. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. If you liked this video, I really hope that you will click that thumbs up button, Be sure to leave your comment below, letting us know which political party you associate yourself with. And any questions or comments, please leave those as well. Be sure to subscribe to Psyche Truth, and I'll see you again next time. Has the USA already become communist? Check out our video, Against the USA, Naked Communist Conspiracy Theory. What do psychiatry and communism have to do with one another? Check out our video, Is Psychiatry Communist? What would a eugenic society look like? To find out, check out our video, Sex Control Police State. And if we were in a eugenic society, would you be fit or unfit to survive? Check out our video.